Good evening, everyone. I'm Gautam Yadama, Dean of the School of Social Work. Welcome to our event this evening, a conversation on racial trauma with Resmaa Menakem. The Boston College School of Social Work, together with the Forum on Racial Justice in America, the Lynch School of Education and Human Development, Cornell School of Nursing, Morrissey College of Arts and Science, and the School of Theology and Ministry are proud to co-sponsor this conversation on racial trauma this evening. This event is an outcome, actually, that started a few years ago, but it's recently an outcome of synergies between two very important strategic initiatives within the School of Social Work, our Black Leadership Initiative and Trauma Integration Initiative. Both of these exciting new programs in the School of Social Work are designed to prepare students for cutting-edge practice in the field of social work that move us beyond the typical curriculum found in schools of social work. To learn more about the Trauma Integration Initiative and the Black Leadership Initiative, please visit the Boston College School of Social Work website. This also is born out of this conviction we have around addressing racism and racial trauma. We are resolute in building an anti-racist social work practice. So let me now turn to my colleague, Kathleen Clinton, Assistant Professor of the practice, to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. Just a couple of logistics and an opportunity for us to arrive ourselves together this evening. So first, I want to let everyone know that this event is being recorded. The plan for this evening is a conversation between Resmaa Menakem and Sam Bradley, followed by a response from Vince Rougeau, who is the director of the Forum on Racial Justice in America and dean of the Boston College School of Law. There will be time after the discussion for questions. So we ask that you place your questions in the chat and we will gather those and present them during the Q&A to our presenters. We are going to be talking about trauma, race, and racialized trauma this evening. And for some, this may present challenges based on our lived experiences. We ask that you be present tonight in a way that makes sense for you. If you need to step out or if you need to take a break, please do so. So in order to begin tonight, I'd like to ask us to take a few moments to arrive to this space together. Please join me in taking a few deep breaths. And as you're breathing, make any adjustments necessary. Check in with your body and make any adjustments or shifts necessary to really allow yourself to arrive to this space tonight. And over your next few breaths, take a moment to feel the connection with the almost 400 other people present in this space with you, creating a sense of connection among us across distance. And allow our collective breath and connection to create for you a sense of openness to our shared experiences this evening. I will now hand it off to my friend and colleague, Dr. Sam Bradley. Dr. Bradley is an assistant professor of macro practice at the School of Social Work and is the co-director of both our Equity, Justice, and Inclusion Initiative and the Black Leadership Initiative. And Sam will be introducing our guest for this evening.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good evening and welcome to our audience tonight. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge with respect that Boston College occupies the ancestral homelands of those American Indian tribes that have inhabited this land for centuries, including the Massachusetts people and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples. We pay our respects to elders both past and present, and we name the genocide, displacement, and continued injustices carried out in the name of progress. With humility, we recognize and respect all Indigenous peoples, their histories and ties to the land. I encourage you to learn more and to support decolonization efforts such as land reclamation and native language education efforts. Indigenous rights are connected to all human rights. Tonight, it is my true privilege to welcome Resmaa Menakem, New York Times bestselling author of My Grandmother's Hands. Author, artist, and psychotherapist specializing in the effects of trauma on the human body and relationships in Black families and Black society. Resmaa has instructed and trained personnel extensively in the United Arab Emirates Police Department, as well as provided years of experience as a trauma counselor and trainer to military and US contractors in Afghanistan. Resmaa is also the author of 2 additional books, 101 Tips for Emerging Justice Leaders, and a powerful book on conflict in relationships titled Rock the Boat: How to Use Conflict to Heal and Deepen Relationships. Resmaa helps leaders examine and begin to heal the trauma of racialization that thwarts emergence. He coaches leaders on how to do the embodied work to gain the cultural maturity to lead and build community within themselves, their groups, communities, and movements. Welcome, Resmaa.
Thank you, Brother Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. Anytime I get a chance to speak with fellow social workers, I'm always heartened by it. So I'm glad I'm doing this with you, brother.
Excellent, excellent. I'm over the moon excited, which actually, you foregrounded my first question. It's one that I really love to ask every social worker I get to visit with, which is, what brought you into social work?
I think, well, my mom always said, and she says to me, that I always leaned into people, right? That I was always going up to people, and I was always, now that worried the heck out of her, right? when you probably gave her some ulcers, but she said I was never the person that was like always like scared or trying to, right? I was always leaning into people. She said, you'd let anybody pick you up and stuff like that. And so I think in some ways, man, I think I came to the planet like this. I think I came to the planet energetically leaning into people and really liking people and enjoying people. And I think social work caught up to my spirit. I think social work I think it was a vessel for me to express what was already there. And luckily I had elders and mentors and people who saw the kind of brightening of my spirit and suggested, well, you might want to try this, you might want to try that. And social work just fit, especially my brain, the way that my brain works like I work with things in fractals. So I begin to, the way that I think about stuff, like, to me, art, social work, writing books, they are not different. They're all part, and there's something that'll show up here and resonate something over here. And I begin to kind of inquire and examine about those things. That's just kind of the way my brain works. And so I think social work, because it has borrowed from different disciplines, right? I think that kind of fit my rubric, my kind of energetic rubric, and allowed me to express myself more fully than maybe if I became just a psychologist. I'm not throwing dirt on psychologists. I'm just saying it didn't really fit the way that my the energy of my spirit worked.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's definitely a flavor to the profession in that way, in terms of its interdisciplinarity, for sure. Yeah. So since much of social work education is, the shared experience that you have, I'm curious about what brought you into developing your embodied approach to racialized trauma. What did you see as maybe it was a gap that was missing, or some inspiration that came along that brought you here?
Yeah. The work that I think, even when I was an undergrad, the work that I did was always kind of leaning, like I said, leaning into people and working with brown, black, and indigenous people. That's the, I mean, my undergrad, everything, when I look back on my career, everything that I've done has had some bodies of culture and issues around racism and access has always been in there someplace. And I don't think that I sat back. I don't think I sat back and said, "Oh, let's do a gaps analysis." What thing? I don't think I did that. I think what happened is that I was being impacted by the structural pieces that both in going through school, being bused, both having an experience of with police and all that different type of stuff. And I think that started to kind of begin to shape and question the kind of structural aspects of things, not just the interaction or transactional pieces, but really like like I said, with fractals, what's happening here that's also being represented with more energy up here. And so what actually made everything came together was both something that I call it. So in my book, I talk a lot about the precipice, and the precipice as that place that has both possibility and peril at the same time. And I reached that when I went to Afghanistan. I did 2 years in Afghanistan, working with military contractors for 53 military bases in southern Afghanistan. And so one of the things that happened while I was there is that in order for me to facilitate and do the trauma work, and not opening up trauma work, but working with people as they've been traumatized, as somebody breached the wall and shot somebody, or as people hung themselves, or as somebody was dealing with rape or something like that. In order for me, and also dealing with the environmental things like heat. It was 120 degrees, 25 degrees there sometimes, and all of the, and working with all of these pieces, in order for me to give services, I had to override much of that for myself. In order to be in a room with somebody that was dealing with something that had happened, I had to override. And so that override piece became the way that I survived it. And I did that for 2 years. I did not begin to work with it until I got back here in 2013. And that's when my own pieces around horror and terror and the disorienting and the disorientation started to come up, and I started to struggle with suicide stuff and things around whether or not I should be here, and not being able to articulate. And that push, luckily I had people around me. I had trauma therapists around me who were friends of mine that I loved. And so they wouldn't let me go. They wouldn't let me just like do the normal things that I was doing. And I did it for a while, but like the normal things around isolation. That kicked me in, that suffering's edge that I got to with that actually kicked up a story that I kicked the book off with. It kicked up a story about my grandmother's hands. And it was that when my grandmother used to lay on the couch and then lay her feet across our laps and have her hand on her hip, and we would rub her hands while she was watching TV. One particular time I was rubbing her hands and I was comparing hers to mine. And my grandmother was a smallish woman, but she had thick fingers, right? And she had thick pads on the back of her fingers, and then the thickness in her thumb and the thickness inside. And so I was looking at her and I said, "Grandma, why are your hands so fat like that?" And without missing a beat, she didn't even look at me when she said the first thing. She said, "Oh boy, that's from picking cotton." And I was like, okay. And then she turned and she looked at me. She said, "Boy, you ever seen a cotton plant? A cotton plant got these burrs." And she said, "My daddy was a sharecropper, so we be walking up and down them roads when I was 4. And when I walk up and down the roads, you stick your hands in that cotton plant, it rip your hands up. And until you bleed, until you get them calluses, you was gonna bleed until you got them calluses." And that's the way she's talking. That's what I'm hearing in her voice. And then she looked at me and she finished watching TV. I didn't remember that story again until I was at my suffering's edge with my own trauma stuff.
Wow.
And then all of the historical stuff came to me. All of the intergenerational stuff came to me. All of the persistent institutional stuff came to me. All of my own personal stuff came all at the same time. And it got me to thinking about this fractal stuff. Like, how does this stuff kind of like accordion work? And that's how I came to the book. It was from that story. It wasn't until, you know, I was 50 something years old that I remembered that story again. And I remember it came to me. I totally forgot that story until I started getting to my own suffering's edge. So that's how I came to it.
Wow, incredible. Well, I'm happy you're still with us here in the land of the living, man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Really, you know, I don't think that we oftentimes gauge the way that these traumas that we experience, like police violence and military conflict, or even, you know, natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, for instance,
Yep.
you know, they just ride on you.
Yep. They ride and they weather. And that's the thing about the body, right? Is that trauma decontextualized in a person over time can look like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family over time can look like family traits. Trauma decontextualized in a people over time can look like culture. And it lives in people's bodies. It weathers. It has a chemical component to it. These things weather the nervous system and weather the brain architecture and weather the cardiovascular system and weather the sexual systems and weather the endocrine systems. But we don't account for that. We want to act like everything is episodic as opposed to structural. And it's like to listen to y'all talk about, you're beginning to look at trauma integration and Black leadership. And I just think that those pieces, in terms of, if you can bring, not if you must, in order to actually be of service, you must help those people who are going through that, bring the soma into the equation, bring the body into the equation, not just in terms of, like, you know, yoga or something like that, but actually being, having the skill to interrogate, having the skill to examine the body and what happens when people are experiencing things. What are the intelligences that exist that get pushed off to the side because we only think that the only intelligence is cognition, when we have many more types of intelligences that need to be cultivated. So, yeah.
Yeah, you know, as we endeavor, my colleague and I, Dr. Tyrone Parchment, who we're co-constructing this Black Leadership Initiative with, one of the things that we're very concerned about is the notion of healing as we arrive in our inaugural class together. I'm wondering if you might speak to that as we bring together this, you know, novel group of folks who are very interested in leadership, but also have their own journey to go through as burgeoning social workers in bodies of culture.
Yeah. Two pieces to that, brother. The first piece is that many times when people want to have a conversation about race, or they want to have a dialogue about race, many times people have not really done the container building that needs to happen to withhold and withstand the 400 years of charge that race has to it. Listen to what I'm saying when I say race is the concept of race has energy, has a charge to it. And many times we think that dialoguing is the way to get through, or the way to bring some type of understanding to race, is to dialogue. And what we don't realize is that if you don't build a container by which you are both contextualizing and holding the charge, what will happen is that that charge will blow apart the container that you've set. And then people will have a very difficult time coming back, because the charge has created cracks. There is the charge has a vortex to it, right? And many times why people don't want to open it up is because that charge has an overwhelmingness to it. And so what I would say to you, brother, is if you are bringing bodies together and bodies of culture together, and there is any aspect of it that is about race, you have to spend time building a container with other people, with other people that are going to hold that group of people. You have to spend time building that container, so what can emerge can cook and emerge through. Otherwise, like when I'm working with people and I'm doing stuff like I do when I'm working with organizations, and I'm trying to help them work with it, and they say, well, we really like for you to come in and just help us work with that. And the first thing that I say, one of my caveats to it is that I say, let's say you have 500 people in your organization. What I say is that if you don't have 10% of those people that are willing to create a container first, that means go through a year first. If you don't have at least 50 people that will go through that, I won't come and work with you, because the charge is so awesome when it comes to race, that if you don't have a container of people that you've been with first, that you've developed a cultural alignment with, that you developed some somatic languaging with, that you develop some sense of rhythm with, if that is not there first, when you bring other people in, the container will crack. So I really, and what I'm trying to say is, you have to respect the charge of race, because if you don't, you will inadvertently be pushing people back into their protective mechanisms, back into those pieces, and they won't be able to language, because much of it has been decontextualized. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah, it makes lots of sense to me.
Okay.
It's like when you bring folks together and you want to have a conversation about race, and yet folks leave the room injured, right?
Yes.
Like everything's come up and they're like, I don't know what to do with this.
That's exactly right. And they never want to come back to that again. Every time in organizations, we're going to have a DEI training, all the Black folks start looking at their vacation time and looking at their sick time and looking for, man, I do not want, because what happens is the construct of race in America. So there's a rubric that I have, right? And the rubric that I use, that whenever I do talks like this, or whenever I'm working with bodies, is this. And if you don't understand this underlying organized rubric, everything else about America and white body supremacy will confuse you. And it is this: the white body deems itself the supreme standard by which all bodies' humanity shall be measured, structurally and philosophically. Pause. Just pause on that for a minute. The white body deems itself the supreme standard by which all bodies' humanity shall be measured, structurally and philosophically. And any body that is not in a white body is seen as deviant from the standard of humanness. The race question in this country and the race question in the world is actually a species question. That's the subtext that we miss when we talk about race. That idea of the white body being shorthand for who is human and who is not has been woven through every institution. It is the foundational principle of economics, of education, of science, of philosophy. And so that got woven through, and then over time became decontextualized as standard. That's what we're working with first. This is one of the things when I tell people when they're talking about DEI training, and they're talking about inclusion, that will never hit that. Because what happens is that if you don't say that first, then when you say diversity, you're saying, I want to diversify from something. There is something first, and then I'm diversifying from it. Right. If you say inclusion, you're starting with something first and you're including it in. If you never have a place that you start from, then diversity ends up becoming collard green Wednesday and quinceañera Tuesday and all of these aesthetic things, right? Not how you move through space and time, not how you understand your relationship to creation and stuff like that. It becomes aesthetic, it becomes food, it becomes colors, it becomes flags, it becomes that stuff. But this idea of understanding that in the current construction that we live in, the white body is shorthand for humanness. And if you can't land that first, then you're really not doing diversity and inclusion work.
Wow, thank you for that. I recall telling a group that I was working with one time, when folks were saying, well, I'm stuck. I don't know how to disrupt the system. And I remember saying, well, people are a part of the system.
Right.
And yet at the time I was thinking very cognitively, and as I've come into contact with your work in this embodied approach, I'm realizing even more deeply, I think, how the body really disrupts the system.
Yes, the body is key, brother. When I talk about the body, right, and I talk about the Black body, woven into that piece that I was saying about the white body being shorthand for humanness, right? Woven into that is, and through that structure, is anti-Blackness and indigenous invisibility. Those were woven into that construct. And so not to include the body leaves bodies of culture sometimes thinking that the defect is inside of them, right? What's wrong? Why can't I, right? Those pieces, something must be wrong with me that I keep having this urge to make a particular move, right? And we think that it is a testimony to us not being defective. One of the things that Black bodies, indigenous bodies, and brown bodies all struggle with in my private practice and when I'm doing my communal work is this sense of fraudulence or imposterness or shame, racial shame, right? That's not episodic, brother. That's structural. And we keep developing strategies that are episodic. We keep developing concepts that are episodic, not getting at that piece around and I'm not talking about ethnicity. I'm not talking about identity. I'm not talking about national origin. I'm saying those things are important. I'm saying, but what I'm talking about is specifically the pigmentated theology that this whole racialized piece is founded on, right? And that
Right.
yes, there is culture and identity and ethnicity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the body. I'm talking about how there was a structure that was created on pigmentation, a real visceral structure that was developed on the white body being the standard and everything else being a deviance from that standard. And we all ingest that water. We all ingest that air.
And yet the approach to somatic abolition is different depending on what your embodied culture is.
Yeah, it's different in that. Well, actually, let me say it different. Okay, it's not different. The rubrics are the same. The adaptability is different depending on the culture that you come from and what has happened. I come from a people who experienced 200 years of legal rape, right?
Right.
200 years of not illegal rape, 200 years and more of legal rape, in which there was profit in the raping, right? There was stature in the raping, right?
Right.
That piece may be different than I'm talking with somebody who has experienced some of the same things in New Zealand or in Australia, some of the same things, but not necessarily that particular piece, right? And so it's adaptable. The things that I do, the kind of work that I help people do is it's the same pieces, the same kind of toys that we work with, but your particular identity, background, historical piece kind of flavors it. I put a little, it's like if I got a stew, I put a little bit more paprika in this with a little bit more of this, right? But the basic sense of it is the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk about more, I guess, give us a definition of somatic abolitionism?
Yeah. So my basic definition of somatic abolitionism is that white body supremacy and racism has to be abolished through the body first, not just through intellect, not just through some type of initiative or something like that. It has to start with the body, and in starting with the body, you have to slow things down so people can begin to develop a sense of discernment. One of the things that happens when you begin to work with race, right? Because it has a charge, the body will begin to do things with it, right? And so one of the things that it might do with it is begin to constrict, right? Constriction is where discernment is becomes. You find discernment the more you contend with constriction. You begin to discern constriction from resource or expansion. But if you never have the constriction, it's really hard to develop the discernment. So it is a very important piece to notice that and then begin to track the patterning of the discernment, right? That starts with the body. So if I say something about, if I say my people I am descended from a people who were legally raped for over 200 years in order to create the wealth of this country. I don't even have to see to know that something is happening for you when I say it.
Yeah.
Right? And part of what somatic abolitionist does is to begin to slow that down so I can discern, so you can discern what that is, right? You can begin to discern, is that historical? Is that personal? Is that intergenerational? What's the flow of it? What's the texture of it? Does it roil? Does it shoot? Does it stick? Like, what are the pieces of it? So me and you could begin to develop a language for it. As I begin to witness you move through that, as you begin to witness me move through that. It is a very sacred piece that I'm talking about, right? To begin to do that type of work. So for me, somatic abolitionism is about the beginning to start with the body, slow it down long enough so we can discern what needs to be discerned, so we can lean into and deepen resource so something new can emerge.
I just, when you speak, you make me think about my family. And my great grandmother was an enslaved person.
Yep.
And, every time my family gets together, without hesitation, we start shouting in memory of our ancestors.
Yep. Yep.
And, usually it's one of our elders, particularly my Aunt Cleo, if she gets a chance to see this video.
That's it.
To remind us of how we overcame.
That's right.
And I think about that time that we come together and we call out and we shout and we're together, about how that just so much embodies culture and also healing in that moment together.
Yeah. So brother, you just said something, and this speaks to why this is a slow, intimate process. This is why when I do my work, I separate white bodies from bodies of culture, right? It's because those pieces are sacred, and many times the depth of the work can't be done with the white gaze, the GAZE, right? It can't be done with that. It disrupts, right? This is not about people being good or bad, right? This is about the fact that when we are getting together and Aunt Cleo, did you say Cleo?
Cleo, yeah.
Yeah, Aunt Cleo starts shouting, right? And somebody starts wailing, right?
Mhm.
The wailing and shouting really is I really believe is ancestral work, right? It is when she starts to shout, something in my nervous system pays attention and says, this is deeper than her shouting. This is connected. You know what I mean? Even if
Yes.
I don't have an articulation for it,
Yes.
this is something else happening here. When I hear her groan and mutter, go, right? I don't need to know well, what she's really trying to say is that in her cognitive brain is I don't need that. What I know is that Auntie Cleo is working, and this is work that is vibratory and connected to vibes, and that vibration that's connected to vibes is literally connected to creation itself, and it is images and thoughts, and it is how she makes meaning in real time, and it is behavior and urgings that are either thwarted or allowed to expand. It is feeling and affect. It is sensate. Those are the six intelligences that many times get crowded out for the sake of logic or for the sake of quote unquote objectivism. And what I'm saying is, when when Auntie Cleo or my grandmother are doing those things have been passed down and through. And what is being said is, you must reclaim this. You must reclaim this. And you must understand that this is real intelligence and real knowledge. And you are not defective. Something has happened and something continues to happen to your people. And so for me to let you know that from the ancestors, I'm gonna let you hear this wail that hits your eardrum in a different way than somebody screaming, that hits your eardrum in a different way than somebody just shouting at each other because they're angry. When you hear Auntie Cleo say that, something is being remade in you. Space is moving in you. And we have to reclaim those pieces as real knowledge. That's healing. That's the healing.
Wow, powerful. I just think too about how, much of this information, this knowledge has existed in indigenous wisdom for so long, and now finally it feels like the neurobiology is catching up with us.
Yep.
I just told a group of students, stop waiting for that.
Stop waiting. Reclaim it. It's already there. It's already there. Reclaim it and own it and write on it and push back on anybody else that tries to usurp it. Indeed. Don't allow people to have your wisdom because they don't know what to do with it.
Wow. Thank you for that, Resmaa. I'm going to give you a chance now to have a little break, and I want to transition our program. So I'd like to take a moment now and transition to inviting Dean Vincent Rojo, to the Dean of the School of Law at Boston College, to respond to our colleague Resmaa. Dean Rojo is currently serving as the Dean of the Boston College School of Law and is the 2021 President of the American Association of Law Schools. In addition to his leadership responsibilities at the law school, Dean Rojo also serves as the inaugural director of the Boston College Forum on Racial Justice in America and as a senior fellow at the Center for Theology and Community in London. This summer, Dean Rojo will at great loss to Boston College, will become the very first lay person president of the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us, Dean Rajun.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Resmaa, for what was just an extraordinarily powerful discussion. But also, I want to thank you for your work and what it has opened up for me personally, and also what it has allowed me to understand and to integrate how I think about the work that I do in the law, which was the first piece that I wanted to share, right? I am trying to understand this deeply spiritual, deeply body-centered work that you're doing and translate that into work in a profession that is so focused on the rational mind.
Yes, yes.
And on a notion of objectivity and fairness that has a lot of difficulty contextualizing these cultural and historical realities. But if we are really to do justice in the law, we must begin to understand everything that you have been describing in terms of this notion of trauma, its intergenerational nature. And in this country, which is another piece I'd like to focus on, the way it has been bound up in such an extraordinary way with this concept of racial hierarchy.
Yes.
The pinnacle of which is the white body.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share a story from early in my career, which when I read your book, it just came rushing out of me. So when I was I had just joined the faculty at University of Notre Dame. This was in the late 1990s, and it was in 1999. And one thing that's always been very important at that university is football. And it so happened the year after I joined that an all-American football player from Notre Dame, Black player, had fallen into some difficulties in his life and was ultimately shot dead by the police in San Diego. His name was Demetrius Dubose. He was shot 12 times by 2 white police officers who were armed. He was unarmed. He was perhaps under some the influence of some drugs or something, but nothing that you would think presented immediate danger to them. But of course, his appearance before them triggered that reptilian brain that you talk about and caused them to shoot him 12 times, 2 men with guns, because clearly their lives were in danger. Now, remember, this is over 20 years ago, and I felt so moved by the injustice of that. I wrote to the paper at the university, the student paper, and said, does anybody find it disturbing that someone that you worshiped when he was on the gridiron
Thank you.
has been gunned down 12 bullets, 5 of which were in his back, by armed policemen who were in fear of their life? Could that objectively be true? And the silence was deafening. Excuse me. And I even got a student, an 18-year-old student, wrote and said, of course they were afraid. Why would it be unreasonable to shoot him for 12 times? He was going to hurt them. I couldn't begin to articulate the sense of just tragedy I felt. But now I understand, now I can, in a way, that body, that big, powerful Black body, the one that gave them so much, the one that, created such a state of joy for them on the football field and made them feel so great and powerful, was a threat. It was out of its place.
Yes.
And, as soon as he left that world, he was just a scary Black body.
That's it.
And now 20 some years later, as we are watching these tragic police shootings unfold over and over and over again, and I think as a lawyer, how the legal rules rules that allow the police to say, I was afraid, and how
That's right.
it immediately creates a sense
That's right.
amongst mainly white people.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you have allowed us to unpack the fact that it's deep, deep, deep within.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
cannot, they're doing it reflexively.
Yeah. 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 Brother, can I just have to say something to you. When I heard Brother Samuel read read your resume, or read your vitae, one of the things that happened for me, I swelled up with so much pride. It just like it started in my belly, because as a Black man, I know what it took for you to get there. I know the things you had to bite your tongue on. I know the things you had to just toe the line, but your stomach is roiling. I know that. And I just need to tell you, I am so proud of you. I am so proud of you, brother, because this stuff, being in academia like this, is brutal. People think my mother has her doctorate, and to watch what she went through in academia and how she had to shave off parts of herself to get through it, that speaks to the story that you just told, that Black bodies are only as useful as what white people say they're useful. When white people stop saying they're useful in a particular piece, they stop being useful to that institution or to that thing. The idea, brother, that you are trying to look at some of my work, the embodied pieces, and then work somatic abolitionism through law, I think it's blowing my mind just to even hear you say that. Because if you can begin to start with that rubric, like I said earlier, that the race question in this country has always been a species question. Remember, the term race was used to denote speciesness, race of bird, race of dog, race of this, and we think that it's just about the pigmentation, but all of the architecture was about species. This is why no matter how successful a Black person is, regardless of what culture they're in, whether it's the Latin culture, the English culture, the Portuguese culture, whatever culture they're in, the darker they get, the more you start to see monkey caricatures. That's why you start to begin to see that, because it's always been a 3/5 clause is a species question, right? And so the fact that you're starting to begin to think about, okay, now how can I use somatic abolitionism to uproot some of those pieces? That's blowing my mind, brother. That's just like, I mean, when you get there, man, you gotta, like when the epiphany happens and you go, that's it. You gotta call me. You gotta let me know, man. I gotta see that.
Well, I'll keep working on it. I'm going to keep reading your work too, but I have to thank you for opening up this channel. And the one thing I wanted to finish on is the idea to this relationship to the pervasive nature in our country, in particular, violence. How violence and the destruction of human life, the destruction of bodies, has been so tied across all races and ethnic groups. To build the wealth of this nation has required over and over again a certain kind of destruction, crushing of bodies, immigrant bodies, native bodies, Black bodies, and how fear is so deeply ingrained in us that we can't even see 20-some young babies get killed in a mass shooting.
Come on.
That there's something wrong with this. We have to change it.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
The gun, we need the gun.
Yeah.
And I see that, for Black people, of course, so much of our inner being has been disfigured by violence and the fear of being the subject of violence that we cannot control or that we cannot respond to.
Yeah.
Really, it's infiltrated everything in the country. It is constant. And now we see it over and over again with mass shootings. How we just can't, we refuse to change, and we refuse respond.
Brother, let me just say this piece. The current policing model. So I'm writing my new book, right? And one of the things that I've been writing about in this new book is that the current policing model is what I call a feral policing model, right? It is feral. That's why you see the things that you see when it comes to Black bodies or brown bodies or indigenous bodies. That there, for most of our history, that the idea of the police officer and the Klan have never been two separate streams. They've always been connected. Sundown towns, knowing which sheriff you needed to not go to, right? Knowing all of those pieces are part of the feral policing model. The gun is tied up into that piece as well. One of the things, let me just say this last piece. I always say that, but I really mean this. So here's one of the things that we have yet to contend with, or that white bodies have yet to contend with. For 1,000 years, the white body, the poor white body, was brutalized by the elite white bodies. That happened from 500 AD to the 1500s, right? For 1,000 years, that brutalization, all of the stuff, all of the horrible stuff, the Tower of London, all of these pieces, all of that stuff happened in that 1,000 years. And then that body came here and came into the islands. Nobody dealt with that brutality or that trauma, right? And so what happened is that elite white bodies after the Bacon Rebellion decided that they would, because the Bacon Rebellion had both enslaved Africans and indentured servants that almost overthrew Virginia. It was at that time that you see, years later, the first time you start to see white persons, not merchants, not landowners, white persons. That orchestrated the idea of the white body being the standard as shorthand for humanists. The moment that happened is how that happened. So what happens is that the Black body and indigenous body became the place where that energy, that trauma that never got dealt with, that became the place by which they channeled that energy. That's why you see that. And until white bodies begin to develop a living, embodied, anti-racist culture that doesn't currently exist, white bodies collectively do not have collective efficacy or agility when it comes to race. They do not. Because they have not had to develop a rubric but in which to navigate race, because they have been standardized, right? And so what you're finding is that white bodies actually now, if they really want to save their children, are going to actually have to start developing a living, embodied, anti-racist culture, not strategy, not, you know what I'm saying? A culture that can hold that piece. That's why this piece is so vexing, is because the energy, Einstein said, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can be manipulated, it can be thwarted, it can be maneuvered, right? And what we're dealing with is energy that has never been dealt with in the white body, being prostrated and pushed through and blown through Black, indigenous, and bodies all across the world.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to engage with your remarkable work. And thank you have allowed me to express and to think about in terms of the work that I do, and look forward to an ongoing conversation in the year ahead. So
thank you, brother,
being here with us. And the pride runs both ways.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
I'm very thankful for the both of you. And I actually have a question for both of you. We, just so that the audience knows, we will move into a question and answer format shortly, but I'd like to ask a question that I think would be important for our students here. We have many people watching tonight. As Kathleen mentioned before, over 400 folks have joined us. But in particular, I'd like to speak to Black students for just a moment here at Boston College. I wonder if both you, Dean Rougeau, and you, Resmaa, what you might tell them as students who are navigating college life and higher education, who had to endure the challenge of navigating a predominantly white institution in order to receive their education. What advice, if you could go back to 18-year-old selves, would you give them today?
That's a hard question, but I would start with recognizing the internal power you have to be you, and to never allow your core humanity to be lost. So, this sense of being an imposter is real in these environments. And, it can affect all students in different ways, but for those of us who come from this community, this Black community in this country, it can be such a heavy burden to carry.
Yes.
It not only becomes an issue we deal with our white brothers and sisters on campus, but with one another.
Yes.
Because there always seems to be a need to knock someone down so that you can move forward. So reject that, and claim your goodness. Insist in your interactions with others that who you are matters, and be open to who these other people are that you're attempting to engage with, and try as hard as you can to do the kind of work that Resmaa's talked about in his book, to find those moments when your body is constricting, you're feeling that you're going to a place that you don't want to be, and move beyond that. Teach yourself that you belong here. Community belongs to you as it belongs to anyone else, and you have to claim it and own it, and demand that you will be, respected and honored for the person that you are.
I want to piggyback on that, and I want to say, you will be brutalized. You will think that you're an imposter, or you are fraudulent. That's part of the structure that is not intrinsic. There's a difference between structural value and intrinsic value. Intrinsically, you are a living, embodied representation of creation. And what I need you to know, what I need you to know is this. If you've never heard another Black voice say this before, I want you to hear me say this. You are not defective. You are not defective. You are not crazy. The things that you're picking up on vibratorily are really happening. The things that are making you constrict are really happening. And you may need to get support for that. And you may need to talk with other Black bodies or other bodies of culture so y'all can create a container to move that through with each other. Because the things that are happening to you and afflicting you are not just individual. They just didn't happen to you. They happen to your people. So you must develop communal ways of dealing with the communal terror. Your own individualness won't allow you to carry that. You must carry that and allow other people to carry that with you, because it is a communal terror that your body has experienced, not just an individual terror. So you are not defective. Repeat that to yourself every day. You are not. The system will make you think that you are. The structure will make you think that you come from a people that have done nothing. It is a lie on its face.
Thank you both. I think I needed to hear that.
You do. We all need to hear it, brother. We all need to hear another body, another body of culture, or another Black body say to us, brother, I see you, I love you, you are not defective. Off top.
I just want to express deep gratitude to you both for joining us. And this has been such a powerful conversation. I want to ask one more of those vexing questions, Dean Rougeau, which is really want to hear from both of you about how do you engage in a process of sustaining yourself while you do this work?
This brother asking like Plato type questions, like Socrates type stuff.
Yeah, I just saw something pop up in the chat that helped. That said self-care.
Yeah.
But I think that's helpful in a way, because I think, look, I mean, we are all going through a journey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the beginning of my career, I did not have some of the strategies I have now.
That's right.
In my career, I felt the imposters, I felt the burdens, I felt people trying to prevent me from succeeding. I knew that there were all of these barriers that were designed to make me feel less than, designed to make me feel that I could not succeed, that I was trying to do. But I did, and I guess this was critical, I built relationships with others, relationships of honesty and support and caring across all kinds of backgrounds, because I learned through that many of my white brothers and sisters in the academy were also deeply scarred and wounded in various ways that allowed us to find a sense of mutuality and support for one another. Some of the things I was going through were different. Some of the things that were unique to me. But when you build deep, caring relationships of honesty, it's the container, I think, that Resmaa.
Yeah.
Then you can start talking about those hard things. I could really share my pain.
Mm-hmm.
I needed people with whom I could share my pain and my fear, honestly, and not feel that it would be used against me or it would diminish me. So I think my advice is to be open to the possibility of these relationships as a source of support and growth and healing, and to allow that healing to take place in the context of a meaningful sense of community with others. It doesn't have to be huge, but it needs to be honest and open.
Yeah. Self-care must be balanced with communal care. When we're experiencing this kind of geopathic stress from the myriad of murders of unarmed Black women and Black men and Indigenous women and Indigenous men, when we're experiencing people putting Latino babies in cages, literal cages, when we're experiencing people go to the Capitol on January 6th and kill people and crap and pee in the hallways, we have to understand that those things are not going to be dealt with just because of the weight of that is not the reason why doing your self-care during this time. Some of us have a sense that it doesn't quite assuage the energy. I used to run and feel a whole lot better. I used to do yoga and feel a whole lot better, but now I don't get quite the same sense from it. And the reason is that you're dealing with the geopathic stress also. And so the way you have to deal with geopathic stress and geopathic horror is that you must allow others to carry that with you. And if you don't, you will either have to fold in on yourself or take it out through somebody else. So to me, it is self-care and communal care, and go about the business of constructing that. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much to the both of you. To our audience tonight who received an invitation to join this event, many of you were given the opportunities to submit questions for this evening, and many of you have also been submitting questions to the chat. I welcome Assistant Director Lindsay McMahon, Assistant Director of Global Practice in the School of Social Work, who has generously offered to act as the voice of God and drop in some of these questions so that we might be able to respond to them.
I'm going to tell my grandma you said that. All right, Resmaa, thank you for, Resmaa and Vince and Sam, thank you for what sort of just being vulnerable in this space. And so I am just conveying everybody else's questions. But the first one, and sort of building on the self-care pieces, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed at the hugeness of the structures and systems that keep people oppressed in order to continue making progress?
I think for me, it has been a community effort, right? I have people around me who ask me how I'm sleeping. They don't ask me how I'm doing. They ask me how you sleeping, because that question will make me open up to something. They ask me how I'm eating. They ask me who's watching out for me, who's taking care of me, who's looking out, right? They ask me those questions, right? How your mama doing, right? Those types of things. They ask me those types of things, and demand that I use this creation energy that is within me that needs to be expressed, and I use it in a way that respects. That actually is respectful of that energy, right? And so they tell me, to stop, to slow down, to I'm worried about you, and it is really communal, right? It is when my elder calls me out of the blue and she says, "What you doing?" And I say, "No." She said, "Come see me," and hang up the phone. I know I need to go see her. It ain't no me looking at my schedule and see if I got time, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how I do it. We build it. You can't, if you're doing this work, right? And you haven't built a container, you will eventually blow out of this work, right? We call it burnout. We call it all of these kind of useful things and all that, like these. But really is that you really have to take care of your life force and your life energy, and it takes time to get that rhythm with it. But you should keep your eye on it. You should understand that this is a very serious thing, and this is not about clout chasing or your own individual accolades. You're trying to make sure that a system that currently exists doesn't exist when your children's children are born.
So how are you sleeping?
Not well since the Chauvin trial. They started since they started the jury selection pool. I had been overeating for a while. I've gotten that a little bit better. I had been dealing with some depression and stuff like that. But I'm coming out of that some. I'm coming out of that. So it's luckily I got good things around me, good people around me, and ways to handle some of it. But it's going to increase. The stress level is going to increase. A lot of the people that I love and care about are really involved with the Chauvin trial, and so the longer we go on, the more kind of intensity is going to increase in the kind of geopathic field. So I'm just kind of prepping myself.
Yeah.
What are some strategies that you employ to ensure that white bodies keep themselves decentered in this work when it's designed to highlight Blackness and Black healing?
Good. Listen, that is a great question. So
that question comes from a recent BC School of Social Work grad and a current Somatic abolition student of yours.
Good, good. So one of the first things that has to happen is that you have to let white people know straight up, you are not going to be teaching this. White folks love to get into stuff and start teaching stuff, right? They, you know, before they even understand that this is an emergent process. This isn't just read my grandmother's hands and now you're going to go out and teach, right? The most important thing is to slow it down and allow things to emerge. You don't even know what you're teaching, because the teaching piece is an embodied piece. So one of the first things is being very clear with white folks that the things that they genuflect to, that are that give them some sense of mooring, are not helpful here. This idea of the idea of teaching is one of them. The idea of not working with other white people, especially as it relates to race. White people want to work with Black people when it comes to race. White people want to work with indigenous people when it comes to race. But to work with white, when we're talking about trauma and racialized trauma, the most important thing is for white people to be working with white people so they can build a culture around anti-racism and anti-racist culture and practices. So one of the so those are a couple things, is making the lines very clear. And I'm one lately that I've been really saying that you know, if you are about racial equity and about making sure that white body supremacy doesn't continue to have an existence, and you're not talking about reparations, it's performative. One of the things that I say about white allies is this: how would I know you were a white ally if you didn't tell me? How would I know that? And the second thing is, if you tell me you're a white ally, the first question I'm going to ask you is, who are your people? I'm not interested in your individual allyship. I'm interested in who are the people that are going to hold you accountable? Who are the people that you are going to be accepted by and admonished by? Who are the people you're going to name your children with? Who are the people that you understand what I mean? That development of a culture among white bodies, a living embodied anti-racist culture, is what I key on. I'm not interested. White bodies in this movement love declarations of independence, right? They love declaring themselves independent from other white bodies, right? And that's not helpful or useful, and it is inadequate.
Great. All right, next question. So the recent shootings in Atlanta have highlighted for the public what many Asian Pacific Islander Americans of those cultures and communities have felt for generations. Are there any specific differences to your approach to empowering Black bodies that might apply to these cultures and communities?
Yeah, a couple things. First off, I did a video about 4 or 5 days ago, because it took me some time when all of this happened. It took me some time just to kind of get my bearings about it. And one of the things that I said in the video is that I have people in my life that I love dearly, that if it's not for them, I'm not here. I have people in my life that are of Asian descent that my son calls auntie, right? I have people in my life that that I've known for years upon years upon years, and that I literally love. So, and they love me. And so when that happened, I took some time, because I know that when racialized horror and terror happens, that there is a vertical structure by which we have all been downloaded into this thing about white body supremacy. right? And then there's a horizontal structure by which we have ingested these pieces, and then we play those hierarchical pieces out on each other's bodies, right? And so I knew when that stuff happened that there was going to be all of this stuff that started to energetically started to come out around the stuff that happens between Asian bodies and Black bodies and indigenous bodies and indigenous bodies and Asian bodies and Pacific Island, right? All of these different types of things start to begin to percolate because the idea of race is messy. The idea of race is brutal. The idea of race is visceral. And what I wanted to do was slow it down for myself and say that there are pieces in our stories, and when people say the Asian community, that's not one community, right? There are communities, right? But there are communities, this idea of the model minority and the Asian menace is interwoven. That idea is also that idea also permeates anti-Blackness. That idea also, you understand what I mean? So these pieces that show up, the idea of the model minority and then the Asian menace is intertwined with each other, and it is only useful for how the white collective wields that particular pummel, right? And so for me, these pieces around the saliency of understanding how the rubric of this race thing got started in one of the English colonies, right? I think it's very important. And so I think that when people of Asian descent read my book, there are pieces of it, not because I'm speaking from a Black perspective, from my own particular perspective. But what I'm trying to do is create a skeleton so you can see it and see how your own history is also juxtaposed up against that thing around the white body being the standard of humanness, right? And if you can begin to structurally and philosophically, not intrinsically, structurally and philosophically, if you can understand those pieces, it'll help communities begin to sense into, oh, this is how this hierarchy pits me against the Black body. Oh, I see how this pits me against the Asian. You understand what I mean? You begin to understand it, and then we can begin to unhook it in terms of the intra and intercultural pieces that happen. If we don't do it, then we end up thinking that we created that Black people created these problems, Asian people created this thing, indigenous people created this stuff, right? And what I hope to do is to have people of Asian descent, of any other ethnicity, begin to slow look at my book and do the most important part of my book is the practices. It's not even the reading stuff, it's the practices, because things begin to unwind when you do the practices. So yes, I think that you will have to adapt it for your own cultural pieces. There are things that you already know. When you read the book, there are parts of the book that you go, I always had the sense of that piece, right? And that's because we have lived these types of experiences. So that's, yeah.
So I have technology issues. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So then to build on that, do you see somatic abolitionism as applicable to all forms of oppression, like ableism, sexism, heterosexism, or is it specific to racial justice and anti-racism?
No, I think so I talk about intra and intercultural connections. I think when I'm talking about somatic abolitionism or white body supremacy, that like if you look at it as like a spider web, when I work with this vibratorily, something over here starts to vibrate. I want to be curious about that. Something over here vibrates. I want to be curious about that. Something over here vibrates. These things have intraconnections and interconnections, right? And so I want to be curious about the vibration of those things and see how that plays out and in and around with white body supremacy. So yes, I come at it from this lens because it allows me to moor myself and then begin to say, okay, here's how these other things impact, right? The idea the idea that the white body is the supreme standard, deems itself the supreme standard by which all bodies humanity shall be measured, is true in ethnicity, is true in culture, is true in identity. Let me say what this is why I go to the body and not go to the identity. I did a speech about a year ago, and when I got done, a young white man came off. I came off the stage, and I was walking, and people were talking to me, stuff like that. And I could see him line up, and then he finally got a chance. He came up and he talked to me. He said, "Resmaa," he said, "that was beautiful. Everything you said, I totally agree with, and I think it's important." And he said, "But," so whenever that happens to me, and people say, "But," there is nothing that I said that they agree with. Right? So he goes, "But," he goes, and I know how you feel. As a Black man, I know how you, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, where's this dude going? And finally he says, "Because I am a gay white man. And I've had experiences of oppression too. And I was raised poor." Right? And I stepped there for a minute and I said, "Pause." He goes, wait. I said, "No, pause. I just want you to pause for a second. I want you to hear what you're saying, not just your intellect, but I want you to hear the vibration of what you just said." Right? And then I said to him, I said, "Do you remember me saying the white body is the supreme standard by which all bodies humanity shall be measured, structurally and philosophically?" He said, "Yes." I said, "That still applies here." I said, "Let me give you an example." I said, "In my community, in the things that I'm doing, I am partnering and friends and love people that are Black people that are transgender, Latino people that are gay and lesbian, indigenous people that are poor." Right? Those are people. Whenever I talk to those people, they tell me that they catch hell in the gay community from white gay people, from people that are white and gay. They catch hell. So that's, and I said to him, I said, if in Minneapolis, we could take all of the people who were identified as gay men and we could put them in a building, and the building was glass and you could see through that building. And I said, in terms of power, access, and control, are the Black people and the Latino people at the top of that building or at the bottom of that building? And of course, he did the old liberal shit. He said, "Well, we're all mixed in together." I said, "Then you have never talked to a gay Black man in your life." The rule still applies in identity. The rule still applies in ethnicity. It still applies. So until you work that out, don't come and tell me that you are an ally or we are on the same accord, on the same page, because we are not. And if you don't understand that, I can't trust you.
Powerful. I think, yeah. Sam?
And let the church say amen. Resmaa, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart how thankful I am just to be in this moment and to experience your energy. You know, it's not often, I think, that we get to, you know, I think in a lot of ways meet our heroes. And so I'm so thankful for you sharing your insights and your perspective. And what I really would hope is that one day we can bring you back to Boston College.
Brother, I would love it. I'd love to sit down and chop it up with you. And if we could have your Auntie Cleo cook something and we can sit down and chop it up and eat with our fingers and make it do what it do.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And to our entire Boston College audience, I just want to say thank you for hanging with us. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you got a lot out of it. A big thank you to Dean Vince Rougeau again for his response tonight. And also, there are many people who are in the background who didn't get a chance to be introduced, but they are hard workers who were able to bring this event into fruition. And so I will pass the mic now to Kathleen Clinton, who will send us out.
Well, thank you, Resmaa, Sam, and Vince. This has been an incredibly powerful conversation for all of us to witness. And I encourage you all to just take a few minutes before you sign off to look at the chat, to see the gratitude and the validation that has been expressed by so many of the attendees for your sharing your experiences and your vulnerability tonight. So thank you again to our co-sponsors for working with us at the School of Social Work to make this happen. The Forum on Racial Justice in America, the Lynch School, the Connell School of Nursing, Morrissey College, the School of Theology and Ministry, and the Law School. So thank you so much to all our attendees. A lot of people have asked about accessing the recording. A link to the recording will be available on the Boston College School of Social Work website. So thank you all, and have a blessed evening, a safe evening.
Thank you. I love being here with y'all. And Kathleen, can somebody send my my assistant a copy to that link? I'd like to push it out too. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love you all. Talk to you soon.